Hi, this is Phoenix, and I'm going to try to build up a case for a very simple claim that can be articulated as follows. Humanity is headed towards a greater truth. Humanity is headed towards enlightenment. Humanity is headed towards something significant and spectacular. Now, of course, this is a metaphysical claim, and one of the problems with metaphysics is it's unsubstantiated. I want to say quickly, though, that I think that our emphasis on empiricism and our emphasis on materialism, which can be seen in science and plenty of branches of philosophy, has reduced us to has reduced our experience in the world to strictly encapsulated forms and has stringently held us back. And so if my claim is that humanity is headed towards a higher truth, what do I mean by this? Well, I've already mentioned the idea that I think that our emphasis on empirical evidence and our emphasis on the material world and on materialism in general has held us back. But I think that there's something else, something more, something that's harder to notice, something that is basically under our noses. And this is the idea of the mundane world, the world as it is, or the world as it appears to be. And so the world as it appears to be tends to be focused on very specific things, it would seem, very chaotic things, depending on how you look at it, but definitely very specific things in the sense that it seems that society knows what it wants. And we follow the normal dictates, we follow the rules. And I don't have anything against rules per se, but I do want to challenge this kind of mundane appearance of the world as it appears, and our obsession with making people conform as preventing us from reaching that higher truth. And in the same token, I want to say that that's exactly part of the process that leads towards that enlightenment, because it would seem to me that that tension between conforming to what society expects and perhaps our own drives, our own internal drives, whether they're instinctual, whether they're romantic, whether they're intensely personal, or whatever they are, they essentially there's essentially that tension, and that tension is what pushes us forward and what pushes us further towards this truth that I believe that we're headed towards. Now, I also want to say that this tension exists not just in the individual, but in society at large, if we look at society as an organism. Now, when I talk about higher truth, what am I talking about? Or I want to unpack that term. So I think that truth can only be apprehended in small doses. So there's an idea in Eastern thought, particularly Buddhism, of supreme enlightenment, which is rejected by some thinkers. But there's an argument that the problem with supreme enlightenment is that it would eventually make our understanding static, and there would be no more room for growth and change. And change is exactly what allows amazing things to happen, dynamic things to happen. And so when I say that humanity at large is headed towards a larger truth, I'm not necessarily saying that we're headed towards supreme enlightenment. What I think we're headed towards is a truth that exists and that we can be aware of, and that once we're aware of that truth, we can continue to move forward and understand larger truths or compatible truths as we move towards intense light. So to go back to this idea of light as a metaphor, I would say that truth would represent light, and essentially the light gets brighter and brighter as we go, more and more overwhelming, but more and more powerful. And the light continues to get brighter and brighter and continues to expose all of the things that we normally wouldn't think could exist. And so, of course, all of this is very metaphysical. But I want to kind of offer a philosophical perspective on why I think we should take this idea more seriously. Again, the claim being that humanity is headed towards a higher truth. So basically, I'm expounding a philosophy right now. And this philosophy is going to be interpreted by people. It may be embraced by some. It may be ignored by others. It may be refuted and critiqued by even others. But all of that is not limiting, because all of that leads to this ultimate process that I'm talking about. This ultimate process of evolution, of heading towards something greater that we can only begin to conceive of. And so the idea is that this process of refuting, for instance, so if somebody critiqued what I was saying and found faults and flaws in all of the arguments, their ability to be able to take that argument further would be part of that process towards going towards something greater. This is the same thing with me when I engage in a text. This is the same thing when anyone engages in a text or some truth that someone has realized and is wrestling with. And so, and I think this is important. I think that we can't underestimate the power of conviction and how amazing conviction can be and how amazing belief can be. And so I've noticed that in my life, I've gotten really obsessed with not being an absolutist. And so what I mean by that is being someone that doesn't really believe in absolute truths or doesn't assert those absolute truths. So I might have a truth that I believe in, but I'm not going to assert it as absolute. But as I look around and I see people asserting their absolute truths, even though they completely contradict my own absolute truth, as we could call it, I feel like that is exactly the process that I'm talking about. So me being able to refute or critique or engage with all of these other ideas and subjective realities allows humanity to move towards that truth, towards that greater truth. I would say to an extent, we've already come to many important truths. I would say Buddha deserves credit for that when he came up with his metaphysical system of reality and what reality is when he explained reality, as well as his philosophy of mind. I think he's already hit on some really important truths. But the problem is we forget about the beauty of these ideas because they get lost in the tides of history. But you would expect me to say that what we need to do is we need to dig up these truths, but not necessarily. But what we do need to do is engage with these truths and continue to engage with these truths in order to push ourselves further. So there's that. Now, again, if my claim is this idea that we're headed towards a higher truth, what does that mean? Well, I can't say that I fully know what that means, because I think it's a very complex idea that I'm just barely grappling with. But I want to say that this idea has come to me in an image that is very difficult to escape. I'm going to try to describe this image. One way that I can describe this image is by saying, okay, so we just heard a comment by the president today about some topic, and then later we heard a comment by a friend, and then later in the day we saw an argument break out between two people, and then we turned on the television and watched a show. Now, all of these events seem unconnected. How could this ever lead to any greater truth? What I'm saying is that all of these events are connected in some way, in some metaphysical way that we can only ever begin to conceive of. And so this is related to the idea of cause and effect, but it's a much grander notion of cause and effect. Because essentially what I'm saying is all of these events are interconnected, and they're interconnected because they're part of this complex metaphysical system that exists of humans moving towards a higher truth. And so these events have to be connected by necessity. And so I know a lot of this is very different, very abstruse, overly complicated, but I'm really trying to work through these ideas because I think that it makes more sense to say that humanity is headed towards something greater, something more complex, rather than basically self-destructing. So there is definitely plenty of evidence to suggest that eventually we're going to be wiped out, and there's going to be no trace of terrestrial life left, or we'll blow ourselves up with nuclear bombs and wipe out the human race. But when I think about the universe and my understanding of the universe, I think that the universe is too complex for that. And even when we go into theories about how the universe is going to collapse, or the universe is no longer going to exist one day, or whatever theory you want to go off of, even that to me doesn't seem sufficient, because to me that's a rejection of infinity, and knowing my thought, I reject infinity, or I reject any rejection of infinity, because I think that infinity is a really important concept that we tend to take for granted. So where does all of this leave us? I know that I've been all over the place, and I know that I've definitely been more metaphysical than usual, but this is because I can't shake this notion and this image that I have that we're headed towards something great. So I want you to engage with what I have to say. I want you to refute it. I want you to critique it, but in a way that would lead you towards your higher truth, whatever that may be, because eventually that will be a collective truth that is gonna eventually that eventually everyone will share. And I want to say I don't mean that in an absolutist sense, or at least the fear of absolutism, because the fear of absolutism is the idea that when we're absolute about something, it leads towards certainty that may actually be incorrect, and that certainty starts to lead to dogma, and that dogma eventually leads to some kind of oppression. But I think that this idea that I'm wrestling with is too great for that. I think that even all of the pain and suffering that exists in the world, all of the things we don't understand, are really just distractions from this greater truth that we are moving towards, and this greater truth that exists. And that's definitely what I wanted to make clear. So again, I would just conclude by saying that, again, you may refute this idea. You may be completely materialist and be like, well, everything is reduced to the material world, so there can't be any kind of higher metaphysical truth. Or you might say, it's just a theory, so it has no relevance and bearing on my life. And all of that is reasonable, but I would say again that all of that, the very idea that something is merely a theory, or the very idea that something is merely a religious idea, or an utterance, is a distraction from truth, and the truth that exists. Now, I will say that I don't know what that truth is, but if the idea is that we're all headed towards that truth, I think we're going to find that eventually. And to use my metaphor that I used earlier, the path is just going to get brighter and brighter, and it's going to become clearer and clearer. And then before you know it, we're going to be exactly where we want to be. Again, this is Phoenix, and thank you.